you can, and this is Plato's argument too, you can't make people wise, but you can properly, again, seduce them so that they can come to love wisdom.
But I was going on to say that, really. I mean, all I was going to say is we can't do it by a direct approach, but we can do it by a more implicit and less direct approach. And that approach is actually, sadly, not original, but it is actually to start re-educating, or educating, is what I'm trying to say. I think we stopped educating children about 40, 50 years ago.
Agreed.
We started indoctrinating them and giving them information and testing them on how much of that they retained. But we didn't do the really important things, which are relational.
Yeah.
All the people who really inspired me and taught me did so by their being who they were, and by the way in which the spark jumped across the gap, in the way that Plato describes in the seventh epistle, that this is how philosophy is done, not by writing it down. Mysteriously, Plato completely betrayed Socrates in doing this. But so we need to reimagine what an education is. That would mean freeing up teachers from a dead weight of bureaucracy. In fact, that's one of the very practical things that could be done tomorrow, which would be go around universities, go around hospitals, go around schools, and look very critically at all the superstructure of management and so on. And I reckon about 80% of that could go tomorrow and nobody would suffer. In fact, there'd be a lot more money for doing the things that we really want to do. We've become sucked by a parasite, if you like, which is the externalization of the left hemisphere's drive for control, which is administration. And so, that's a practical answer to the question, but also we need, apart from freeing up teachers to teach in a way that is individual, responsive and alive, rather than just the carrying out of procedures, we need actually to, give people back their cultural tradition. They need to read literature that, it's not fashionable to say this, but they need to understand the last 2,000 years. Otherwise, they don't know what they're doing here. They have a very shallow rooting. So we actually do need to teach history, literature, philosophy, music, all our culture, not just IT, not just procedural learning, but actually creative, empathic understanding of other people, not sitting in judgment on our forebears or on other cultures, but in fact trying to see our way into how they saw the world, because they're no stupider than we are. And they might actually have seen something we've lost.
Okay, so I have a proposal specifically, more practically, about this, which is, first of all, just I'll put a pin in something. The problem we face, of course, is the bureaucracy has wrapped itself around a pseudo-religious ideology that justifies its existence tremendously, and so that's a problematic.
It's a pseudo-religion.
Yes, very much. And what I would want to say is, I don't think we should have teachers in any one institution. So if you look, I'll just take the West, but there's parallel things elsewhere. You had the university, you had the monastery, and you had the church. And they were all interrelated. And one is a knowledge institution, but it has reverence for the wisdom institution, or that's the monastery. And then you have the church, and the church is, but all of these ideas and all of these philosophies have to transfer to real lives. And they're, right?
If I may just add, also hospitals.
Yes. And what I think we need is to have teachers in multiple kinds of institutions that are acting again in this opponent processing with each other, not adversarial. Part of the problem is, and then the Protestant Reformation comes in and splits them from each other, and we get all that. Yeah. But the proposal is, because what we have is we have this idea that teachers are only legitimate if they're in this one institution, and if we have anybody out, I face this, right? But the stuff I do outside of the university is like, why are you doing that? Why are you doing that? All right? And I know lots of excellent teachers that can't find a home in the university because they want to do the kind of stuff that the universities
don't any longer do.
Right. So I think we need to think about, of a living system of teaching institutions where you've got people sort of, but they're bound together in a field again, where the relationality is important. this is the pole of knowledge, this
Yeah.
is the pole of wisdom, and this is the pole of life. And they have to all, and we have that. And I think that's also something that we need to think about bringing back in terms of institutional structures that could actually transform society in the way we're talking about.
And I'd like to just add, sorry,
Yeah.
we need to encourage and provide institutional support for people who are bright to oversee the whole picture to some extent.
Yes.
That doesn't happen in our culture anymore. It used to happen, and it used to happen in this university, but now everything has shifted here, as everywhere else in the Western world, towards ever greater specialization.
Yes.
Now, while we need specialists, of course we do, it's not one or the other. We need people who also are able to take the broad right hemisphere view and see, crikey, look what's happening here. And I believe that what I've done, if I've done anything in my writing, is to open people's eyes. That's why the writing. Of course, once you see it, you see what's going on here. And we don't have any institutions that do that. But back in the 60s, I think the Rand Corporation and others sort of put money behind people that they thought were going to be good. And they just gave them a desk and an office and a Xerox machine and said, do what you want. And out of that came a lot of, genuinely innovative, creative thinking. And we need to bring that back.
Could I respond to just that one thing? So, because this is dear to my heart, because I represent a discipline that is all about the synoptic integration across the disciplines, cognitive science,
right,
and trying to create the lingua franca between neuroscience and information processing, machine learning, psychology, linguistics, anthropology, philosophy, trying to do that, there has been a turning, an increasing recognition by some about the value of this, because the specialization went into psychology in which we incentivized people to innovate something that nobody else had discovered before, finding the effect, the new effect, right? And this is one of the driving motivations of the replication crisis, because if you don't pursue synoptic integration, you don't work out your theoretical grammar well. Your conceptual vocabulary is vague and equivocal, and the fact that you get empirical data is almost irrelevant, because if you get a vague enough construct that isn't responsible to anybody else's work, of course you can find empirical verification. And so the replication crisis has basically started to put up a flag. Some people are recognizing it, that we need the synoptic integrators as much as we need the specialists. And so I just want to put that out.
You both made this point, and I think when people look at the arguments about all the things that are supposedly getting better in civilization, some of which they relate to things that specialization does well. And when we look at the things that are getting worse and heading towards global catastrophic risk, they look at the lack of they arise from the lack of integration across specialty areas. I think that's actually very important. So you were speaking to that the existing educational institutions have a history that we actually want to revive some things from, and that we've actually lost some very important aspects. You were also speaking to not just the educational institution as a single thing, but lots of them. You didn't mention guilds, but also that education needs to be many institutions, and maybe in light of the current situations of the world, some new institutional design as well. But you said something else that I found really interesting when you talked about cutting some of the bureaucracy and administration, which was almost like an externalization of left hemispheric dominance, what David Graeber calls bullshit jobs, that there's this recursive relationship between kind of left hemispheric process and building a world that is the result of that in turn conditions that. And that kind of recursive relationship means we're not just asking, how can we develop things that will give people more wholeness, more integration, more numinous, more sacred, but also how can we undo some of the things that are excessively making us hypertrophic on the wrong modes of mind. And I think we have to do both.
Well, one good thing that might come out of a scarcity crisis is that we find quickly what are the things we can dispense with and what we can't, at least if we maintain enough right hemisphere overview of what's going on. But I fear that now the power is concentrated in the hands of frankly mediocre people who occupy administrative jobs, and that they're not willing to really relinquish that power, and will, it's their validation. But we do desperately need to do it, and you're quite right that what happens is in a culture like that, people are trained to go into jobs like that, and the people who fit the role best are not the people you'd want to be making big decisions about our lives, but they go into it, and the thing is a positive feedback loop.
So how do we break the positive feedback loops that orient us towards futures nobody wants? And how do we, or at least weaken them, and how do we simultaneously develop other positive feedback loops, because they have to have some positive feedback or they won't be able to do anything, that move us in a recognition of the sacred, wise, individual and collective governance? We did not answer that question in full. We spoke to different elements of what it might need to entail, but the clock is saying that it is time that we must wrap.
Yeah. Well, there were